We have two perspectives on fires for this presentation, and the first one is the lost art of campfires. It's kind of a lost art for very good environmental reasons. Most people are carrying stoves these days. We are also going to take a look at wildfires and how they affect recreationists, and mostly they don't, but we'll still take a look at them. Think about this for a minute. You probably know you learned this from Fireman Frank back in first grade. But yeah, what are the three requirements of fire? Fuel. Yeah, we need something to burn, and I don't mean Coleman fuel here. That burns nicely too. But we're talking about wood, sticks out there. Second, we do need a heat source, a source of ignition, something hot enough to get all of this burning. And we need oxygen flow to our fires. So when we're building them, we want to keep all three of these in mind. These three requirements seem pretty simple, but we're still going to break them down and take a closer look at each one of them. One thing to be thinking about is how come wet wood doesn't burn? Where are we running into the problem with these three components? For environmental reasons, we do want to collect our dead wood that's already down on the ground. The stuff that's actually touching the ground may be too damp to burn. But rather than ripping off the lower branches of trees that are dead, look for stuff that's already fallen off the trees. Red dried pine needles certainly catch fire quickly. They can help you get a fire going, but they often burn much too quickly before they can heat up the next bigger sizes of wood. Just one more example of dead and down wood that's down. It's dead. It's no longer growing, but it is up off the damp soil. To do a fire well, the kind that you can stick a match to and then walk away from, it's good to get a double heaping handful, so that's only half as much there, of what we call tinder. Tinder is that matchstick size diameter wood, sort of like the thickness of a pencil. And yeah, you need quite a bit of that. And then you need to gather up a good enough collection of wood that you don't have to run off and get wood and let your fire go out. So a lot of people don't collect enough firewood in advance. This guy's a little more obsessive about it than most, but I completely understand. Because here's what I recommend to people before they even light. First is a double heaping handful of dry tinder, that size that we looked at. Then I'm going to recommend somewhere like 15 1 to 2 foot long pencil diameter sticks. Similarly, collect 15 1 to 2 foot long pencil diameter sticks. Continuing on, making this easy to write down, 15 1 to 2 foot long thumb diameter sticks. And then maybe 10 1 to 2 foot long forearm diameter sticks. And that's enough wood for most of your cooking needs. So get that all in advance. I don't break it up and lay it out quite like he's doing here, but I do make sure I've got all that in a pile like you can see out in front of him off to his right, your left. So now you've gathered all the wood that you're going to need, at least to get going for the first half hour or so, and putting it together in a way that allows oxygen to get in there, our other component. This is an L&T mound fire, so I've collected mineral soil from either over by a creek bed or where a tree is tipped over, and this is collected out of the roots, and I make a pile because the regular soil, if you build a fire right on top of the soil, it's probably full of seeds, and the heat will kill the seeds. So I've got a mound, and then the first thing that I do is build a little bit of platform, and the fire is actually going to start up on top of that platform, which then allows oxygen to come in underneath. I place loosely my double heaping handful of tinder on top of that platform that I made, and then I start stacking up pyramid style, lots of pencil diameter sticks and finger diameter, and I usually add 1 or 2 thumb diameter, but I mostly add those later. Because I built the platform, I can get my match or a lighted piece of paper or a cigarette lighter underneath because the oxygen is going to rise, and I can get oxygen underneath the fire, and it's going to create its own circulation where the rising air from the heat draws oxygen in from underneath. If you build it right on the ground, it's hard to get oxygen in. Also, you need to spread your sticks out enough that oxygen can get in there. So our deserts don't have a lot of wood, sort of by definition almost, but there's a juniper tree there behind him, and the juniper trees shed bark. So down around the base of the juniper tree, you can often find this laying dead and down on the ground, and it makes for great tinder. You take that and roll it between your hands and break those fibers up. And then with the little tiny fibers, it's pretty easy to add a match. I'm not building a whole fire here. I'm just showing that this stuff makes great fire starter, great tinder. We're sea kayaking in Prince William Sound, Alaska here, and it's been raining for 15 days. Not a lot of dry firewood. So we have a machete there and a board, a 2x4, that we're pounding down onto sticks, and we're splitting those sticks. You can see little piles collecting around him. It's still raining lightly. It's starting to break up. And so we're having to create our own pencil and finger diameter sticks out of the driest wood we can find. To get the tinder, we were shaving. Again, the driest wood that we could find, we would split it open. The outer half inch is pretty damp, but deeper inside the wood, we were able to get dry wood that we could then shave with just a pocket knife. After we got the shavings and the little sticks going, we were able to build up a bigger fire and dry out the wood, putting it around the edges, stacking it on top. It was a pretty smoky fire, but we were able to dry out some clothes. You saw this stove system in our gear day. So this is a zip stove by ZZ Manufacturer. It's not the only one. But I bring it back here, that little silver box to the lower left with a switch on it and a wire is a AA battery, one that I can solar charge on a trip. And it runs a little tiny fan at the bottom of that wood burning stove. That's burning at the biggest thumb size, just the last knuckle of thumb size sticks, mostly smaller sticks than that, finger size. And it actually burns spruce cones pretty well too. But yeah, the extra oxygen coming from the fan is why this stove works quite well. It's not quite as fast as a gas stove, but pretty close, and you're not carrying the weight of fuel. So one of the reasons that campfires have lost popularity is wildfires. This was an abandoned campfire that started this little fire. It's when I was working for the Forest Service and had to call it in. It was still smoldering. It hadn't taken off yet. But yeah, some people just left a campfire there. So let's take a look at wildfire movement, and recreationists. For the most part, recreationists aren't having problems with wildfires. I mean, that's an awful lot of smoke. You can see it and stay far away. But I did ask around our different instructors, and one talked about the wildfires of '88 in Yellowstone, had a university class up in Yellowstone canoeing on the Shoshone River. And during the 4 days that they were there, the fire had moved over 10 miles. They thought they were safe. And they did canoe down the Lewis River with fire on both sides of the river, and happy to be in the smoky part. There are numerous other stories. There's a story in Oregon of a couple that got curious when they should have just gone away, but their route went through a fire area, and they ended up diving into tents, the firestorm tents, the reflective tents with firefighters, and those really are built for one person. Fortunately, everyone survived. So remembering that you should just stay away from wildfires, but if you do get caught. It's not a bad idea to understand the mass movement of fire. We've really got three main components here. The first one is fires burn uphill fastest. Just the heat rises and the flames stick up, so they burn uphill quickly. So if you're above one, a fire is down below you, you want to beat it to the ridge. Otherwise, it's better to get down below one where it's also more likely to have a wet stream or something in the bottom. So yes, the first movement is fire rises, goes up slope, can move very, very quickly. It's hard to get a fire to burn down a slope, but they will. And the main reason they can go down a slope are these next two. They move with the wind. So the fire here is both moving up the slope and it's moving to the viewer's left here. So the wind is blowing from right to left in this image, or it was, and the fire is moving that way. And then the third component is embers will blow out ahead, both rising and blow over to the downhill side, which means on the downhill side of a ridge, the fire is likely to then turn around and burn right back up to the top of the ridge from the other direction, rather than blowing down it. Or with the wind, you get those embers blowing out ahead and starting even a mile out ahead of the main front of the fire. So with all of this in mind, we can start thinking about safer places to be. And first of all, far away is a better place. Bare ridges up on the top, there's often rock outcrops at the top, so that can be a place to head toward. Also, the bottoms I mentioned are much more likely to be moist. There's more likely to be a creek, large wet meadows, or lakes that you can go stand in if you need to. We're taking a closer look at the previous picture, the right-hand side where the fire mostly burned uphill. You'll see that there are spots that didn't burn. Continuing on with safer places to be, any place that doesn't have a lot of fuel. You can see in the bottom of this picture that grass would probably burn pretty quickly. Hopefully it would burn out ahead of you and you could enter it after it had already burned. You're also looking for large talus fields, sand dune areas, places that don't have fuel. And then taking a look here to the left is just a closer look over to those areas where the fire was spotting out with the wind out ahead of the storm, the firestorm, that is.